tax cuts, and local authority rates go up this month. Researchers build up the retail price index from about 150,000 prices checked every month across the country, and family spending patterns are monitored to make sure the right prices are checked. It's all worked out by a computer, what else, to give a full picture of how fast prices are rising. Meanwhile, in their citadel, the Price Commission are turning out their own index of price rises, due to hit the shops in a few months. That's already in double figures, though the Commission's main job is deciding whether they think price rises should be allowed. Meeting here in their boardroom, the Price Commission have wide powers to investigate companies who want to put up prices. Recently, for example, British Oxygen found their prices frozen after a pay settlement which breached government guidelines. Very many rises do go through, but equally other companies are probably put off by the mere existence of the Price Commission. They may not get all they ask for, as happened with some beer prices. Or they may find prices frozen pending investigation, as with gas and electricity at the moment, for example. Although petrol, in most cases, did go up last week. And petrol charges now take no account of OPEC's most recent increases. It all adds up to a lot of pressure on the inflation rate, and it won't just be motorists who feel it.
Now the election campaign. And tonight, the Prime Minister switched his attack on the Conservatives from prices to pay. From our election newsroom, here's our political editor, David Holmes.
Just as the campaign was dying down for Easter, the Prime Minister launched himself into a vigorous attack on Mrs Thatcher. He's taken up an incident at this morning's news conference in Conservative headquarters over the future of public sector pay. Mrs Thatcher and her colleagues were asked what they'd do about the awards of the Comparability Commission, which has been set up to consider how the low paid among public service employees compared with those in private firms and how far they should be brought into line. It's one way the government tried to negotiate a path out of this winter's pay troubles. The Conservatives have made quite clear that they disliked the new body, and in answer to questions this morning, they described how they'd treat the cases referred to it. Would they honour the awards? Sir Geoffrey Howe replied, then Mrs Thatcher took up the point.
Cash settlements already agreed will be honoured. Where they go to the Comparability Commission and the amount recommended is above the amount of money available, then if you're to meet them in full, economies may well have to be found elsewhere. It's exactly in line with the... Otherwise, you see, otherwise it means demanding more in tax and rates from people who are already paying too much.
I see that, but does that mean that you would honour those awards and then economise?
You have to do the two at the same time, otherwise you would go above the cash limit. You would have, in fact, if you honour the awards and keep the same number of people, well, I doubt whether you could keep the same number of people, but you may well have to look for economies elsewhere in a service or elsewhere in the economy.
Tonight in Gloucestershire, the Prime Minister took up her words about the decisions of the Comparability Commission. He said they contained a serious risk to industrial peace, a wholly unnecessary risk of repeating the troubles of last winter.
I call on them in this period of campaigning to withdraw this statement immediately. This is the kind of blunder that can upset industrial peace which has been so hardly won. This independent standing commission's got a life in front of it. We have agreed the process in connection with the workers I have already outlined. We've agreed to accept the findings. And we're talking about between 1 million and 2 million people. But there are other groups who may well want, and we hope they will, take advantage of this new independent commission in order to fix remuneration on a fair basis to everybody. And these groups are going to be discouraged to go to the Pay Commission if the findings are in doubt or if they may not be honoured. Now really, the Conservative leaders have lit a fuse here. I don't know whether they understand to what barrel of explosive that fuse could lead, but I call on them to stamp it out at once so that it doesn't reach an explosion. I call upon them to say quite clearly that they will honour the agreements in respect of those groups to whom we have given the undertakings, and that there will be no slippage in that particular matter.
The election campaign will, of course, ease up over the Easter holiday before the party leaders resume their touring of the country next week. But already both the Labour and Tory leaders have been mobbed by well-wishers during walkabouts today. Mrs Thatcher in North London, the Prime Minister during a brief visit to Oxford.
Glad to see you. How are you? Mind out of the way, my dear. I wouldn't want you to get hurt there now.
For the first time, Mr Callaghan's been out and about in a truly public place with the sole intention of meeting people. But his visit to Oxford, one of several marginal constituencies on his campaign list, nearly got out of hand. The large crowd that greeted him tried to follow him into a narrow shopping arcade, and although Mr Callaghan's smile stayed with him, the handful of policemen escorting him had to fight hard to keep things moving. Both shouting critics and well-wishers trying to get closer quickened the pulses of the security men, and the Prime Minister was soon returned to the safety of his car, leaving only a tiny fraction of the Oxford electorate having seen him, let alone heard him speak.
Mrs Thatcher's brand new BL bus will take her to 30 towns during 15 days on the election trail. Mrs Thatcher shrugged off jokes about how much she was going to increase the fares and got down to trying out the in-bus facilities during a couple of circuits of Smith Square.
Swansea, where we do a walkabout, meet the candidates.
Seats on the Conservative leaders' train, plane and bus tour are available to newsmen at £650 a head. The Conservatives say they aren't making a profit, but being Conservatives, there's no question of subsidisation. They should break even.
After a hectic week in which his battle bus has covered over 2,000 miles, Mr Steele headed back home to Scotland for the weekend. Although a 2-hour delay on the motorway meant he almost missed an appointment in Lancashire with his formidable colleague Cyril Smith.
We're better late than never.
My God, the walkabout's off, you know that.
I know, I hear you.
But despite the hold-up, there was just time to meet the mayor in the town hall parlour and pay his respects to Lancashire's living legend, Gracie Fields. Then it was back aboard the battle bus, with the last word inevitably coming from Cyril.
He said, stand in the doorway. I said, what are you going to stand if I stand in the doorway?
Ahead lies a weekend of hard campaigning in the border country before the Liberal leader starts week 2 of his round Britain tour.
Not only Mr Steele, but both major parties are keeping a wary eye on the Scottish nationalists who launched their manifesto today. The nationalists, fighting to keep the 11 seats they won 5 years ago, of course still hope to achieve in the long term independence for Scotland. But in the short term, they're campaigning for a devolved Scottish Assembly, more investment to create jobs in Scotland, and renegotiation or even withdrawal from membership of the EEC. Our Scottish political correspondent, James Cox.
The SNP's main theme will be a bitter attack on what they describe as the betrayal of Scotland by the big British parties, especially over devolution. This was spelt out today by party chairman William Woolf.
The British parties cannot be trusted to honour pledges to the people of Scotland. And I claim that the evidence also shows a steadfast loyalty to Scottish interests and to the truth on the part of the Scottish National Party.
Scotland is an unequal partner in Britain, Mr Woolf told the crowded press conference. But since the referendum, isn't the whole devolution issue now in cold storage?
It may be in cold storage in Westminster, but it is not in cold storage here in Scotland. And if everybody who voted yes in the referendum has the courage to vote for the Scottish National Party, we'll have over 50 seats, and there'll be no question then we will definitely get an assembly.
But why should people vote for the SNP, a small minority party, a pressure group, if you like, at Westminster at this election, when the big issues will be resolved either by the Conservatives or by the Labour Party, whichever one forms the next government?
But if we are in a position of holding the balance in Westminster, they will be resolved in accordance with the wishes of the Scottish people. And that is a very clear possibility in my view.
The last thing a party wants as it enters an election is trouble in its own ranks. And when it happens in a seat which has attracted more than its share of attention before, that's bad. So it is with Newham North East, the Labour Party there. Having decided it didn't want Reg Prentice, it's now disowned by the man who looked like becoming his successor. James Dickens, a former MP, once one of Westminster's doughtiest leftists. He resigned as candidate after a meeting of the local party failed to give him their unanimous support. What a gift for the Conservatives. And this morning they promptly wheeled Mr Prentice into the fray. He attacked the Newham party left-wing elements.
They are aiming at a situation in which MPs become delegates rather than representatives, and delegates not from their constituents as a whole, but from the tiny group who control the local Labour Party. There were 31 people at that meeting in Newham. And I think, therefore, that this is striking at the very basis of parliamentary democracy. The left in this country, the extreme left in particular, have got two objectives: a stronger state and a weaker parliament. And the whole of their operations are directed to those two objectives, and that's the classic route away from our democratic liberties and towards a totalitarian society.
Prentice's bitterness about the Labour left stems from the rough handling he had from them 4 years ago. They'd captured control of the Newham party and told their cabinet minister MP they wanted him no more. Determined to fight on, he launched a campaign in Newham to rally support from the moderates. Leading cabinet colleagues came to lend him support, but were given a similar reception. At this now famous rally, the National Front were found to be to blame for what was felt at the time to be the most violent expressions of left-wing hostility. Finally, Prentice accepted defeat, left Labour for the Tory ranks, but remained MP for Newham North East till Parliament ended last week. James Dickens was the man the local party chose to take on this rock-safe Labour seat. His credentials looked good to a left-wing party. 10 years ago in Parliament, he chaired the Tribune Group. He preached the left's economic strategy with conviction. But since then, it's thought that Mr. Dickens has moderated his political views, so leaving a large chunk of the Newham party far to the left of him and unwilling to offer him the binding commitment he wanted. The party's national headquarters last night brought pressure on Mr. Dickens not to stand down, but he's unrelenting. So today, the Prime Minister and his colleagues on the campaign committee met specially to decide what to do. Tonight, Transport House's special envoy is telling the officers of the Newham party who they should choose instead.
They may tell us that we have that they want us under the circumstances to accept just one candidate, and that candidate will be presented to a meeting on Tuesday next and will be adopted by our party. They may alternatively tell us to go ahead and shortlist ourselves, and we shall do that this evening. We're quite prepared for that, and we will put a shortlist to the meeting on Tuesday next and select a candidate.
So, next week, the new candidate will be in place. But the trouble will not be forgotten. It's not only Mr. Prentice in the Tory ranks who's interested in pointing out the extremists in Labour's ranks and the effect they might have upon its policies.
That election report from our political editor, David Holmes. Now, South Africa. A big diplomatic row has blown up tonight between South Africa and the United States over alleged spying. The South African government said that several senior members of the American embassy's staff would be expelled for spying and given a week to leave the country. At a news conference broadcast live on television, Prime Minister Peter Botha described the affair as an American plot. He alleged that a plane used by the ambassador, Mr. William Edmondson, had been converted to photograph some of South Africa's most sensitive defence installations.
Describing the affair as reprehensible, Mr. Botha said his government had expressed profound shock and dismay to the U.S. ambassador, Mr. Edmondson. He said personally he was bitterly distressed to learn how South Africa's hospitality had been abused. He described the American government's action as one that he would have expected from the Russians, not from the leading country of the Western world. Peter Hawthorne, Johannesburg.
Now, Uganda, as Kampala awaits the arrival of the new president, Mr. Yusuf Ulule. There are reports of widespread looting and continuing skirmishing in and around the city. President Amin, who'd fled east to Jinja, is now reported to have been seen with some of his ministers near the border with Kenya. Amin is still claiming to be president and commander-in-chief. His soldiers are still making life unsafe in the capital, Kampala.
The situation was relatively calm in the Ugandan capital today, with only occasional outbursts of automatic weapons fire, as Tanzanian and Ugandan forces worked on wiping out the last few groups of pro-Amin soldiers still trapped in Kampala. Widespread looting of vacant homes continued in the residential areas, but lessened in downtown Kampala, not because anyone was stopping the looters, but rather because there was nothing left to steal in the downtown area. Despite the occasional outbursts of firing and the uncollected corpses of Amin soldiers still lying in a few parts of the city, a holiday atmosphere continued to prevail, with Kampala residents celebrating what they see as the end of the Amin regime. Tony Abergan, Kampala.
Mr. Lulay has been delayed in Dar es Salaam, apparently by bad weather. Philip Hayton has been talking to the 67-year-old academic, looking at how the million-pound-a-day war is affecting the Tanzanian economy.
Tanzania is among the world's 25 poorest nations. It lives a hand-to-mouth existence, and the expensive war against Amin is strangling its economy. Tanzania's president, Julius Nyerere, certainly doesn't squander his nation's money. He pays himself a mere £60 a week, and he gets little public thanks from his fellow African leaders for what his troops are trying to do in Uganda. Many of the continent's governments are so fragile that leaders become nervous and jittery when they see troops crossing an African frontier. But Mr. Nyerere has the courage of his convictions. He hates Amin, and he's ready to pay a high price to get rid of him. The man who seems destined to be Uganda's next president is everything Amin is not. Dr. Yusuf Luli is a slight and modest man who was enjoying a quiet retirement in London until a few weeks ago. He's an intellectual who's determined to restore democracy to Uganda. In the police officer's mess on Oyster Bay in Dar es Salaam, he runs a government in exile.
The first priority is to re-establish law and order. That, I think, is one thing the people of Uganda have not enjoyed for at least 10 to 12 years or longer. But first and foremost, of course, the rehabilitation of the people emotionally and psychologically. They've lost confidence in themselves. They lost confidence in authority. They've lost confidence in their neighbors. But you see, Amin has been using people, paying people to report upon their neighbors. And this is a very big thing, you know. And this has been going on for the last 8 years. They must get away from that and start developing confidence in themselves and confidence in the people who live around them.
And so, after 8 years of Amin's tyranny and 5 months of war against it, there's every hope here of a quick victory by Ugandan exiles and Tanzanian forces. But even after Amin is out of the way, it's likely that some Tanzanian forces will stay in Uganda to ensure calm while the nation puts itself back together again. This is Philip Hayton in Dar es Salaam.
The Foreign Secretary, Dr. Owen, has said that he, Africa, and the rest of the world will be glad to see the back of Amin. He hoped the expelled Asians could now return, and that Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania could become a focus for stability for the rest of Africa. But how secure did he think was the new regime, dependent as it is on the Tanzanians?
Well, I think that it's very important that Tanzania allows Ugandans now to solve its own problem, and I'm sure they will. I think the President Nyerere is a very wise statesman. He wants Ugandan independence, genuine national government to be formed for Uganda, and I believe that's in the interests of everyone. So I hope we'll see the Tanzanians withdrawing their influence as Uganda builds up its strength. I hope we'll see a united Commonwealth response, and certainly Britain is ready to play its role in trying to generate a Commonwealth aid and development to put Uganda back on its feet, and it'll be in everybody's interests.
Back home, BBC engineering staff working on television outside broadcasts are being called out on a 24-hour strike on Easter Monday. Their union, the Association of Broadcasting Staffs, tonight rejected a management pay offer involving regrading. Grandstand will be among the programme's hit. Tonight, the BBC said it was considering what action to take in the light of what it described as this serious threat to its programmes at this time. And tonight, it now seems unlikely that the Times newspaper will be resuming publication immediately after Easter. Talks between the management and the National Graphical Association about new technology broke down this afternoon, and the management now want the dispute to go to arbitration. Prakash Merchandani has been following today's event.
The management may well have to take their own advice after today's news.
Times newspapers offered to put dispute to arbitration after talks to the NGA failed.
New technology is still the sticking point. Management wants journalists to punch their stories directly into typesetting. The National Graphical Association maintain that it's their job. Meanwhile, the election unit of the paper was busy preparing yet another edition that won't see the light of day. Maundy Thursday is traditionally a printer's holiday, but in the looking-glass world of the Times, the political staff prepare page proofs that are meticulously corrected by the editor. But the numbers that would be flashing out as each page is completed in composition remain stubbornly still. So what did go wrong at today's talks?
The fact is, they absolutely insist that the NGA has a monopoly, so that this system is operated in an archaic and inefficient way, and that we simply cannot agree to.
So when will the Times reappear?
I hope as soon after next Tuesday as possible.
You've obviously lost a lot of money since last November. How long can you afford to sit it out?
That again is something we shall have to assess when we meet again next Tuesday. But as long as it is necessary to get these papers back on an efficient basis so their long-term security is there.
So it looks as if the Booth formula is in ruins, and barring a miracle, there's a long wait ahead. The pressure is now on the unions. 3,000 of their members could be looking for jobs next Tuesday. The question this Easter weekend is, will the NGA accept arbitration? For both union and management haven't moved much further since the deadlock last November.
But there have been more positive developments in some other industrial issues. A settlement seems close in the railwaymen's pay talks. And British Leyland say more of the toolmakers and craftsmen who've been on unofficial strike are going back to work. Here's our industrial correspondent, Ian Ross.
It's at Cowley, where the toolmakers leader Roy Fraser is a shop steward, that the drift back to work is apparently most pronounced. And BL makes the point that in the 4 days the 3,000 or so craftsmen have been out, production has actually been above average at places like Castle Bromwich and Cowley. The extent to which BL has undermined Roy Fraser's demand for £90 a week for the skilled man is demonstrated by figures put out by the company. With the decision to go ahead unilaterally with parity payments and incentive bonuses, the toolmaker at the Cowley assembly plant, where productivity targets have been met, should soon be on £89.50 a week, and on over £90 not long after that. In the matter of railwaymen's pay, talks between the Rail Board and the three unions have been adjourned for a week and are, say the unions, going in the right direction. That should mean a settlement of something like 9% plus productivity payments in these, the last major negotiations of the wage round. The unions in the steel industry have told British Steel Corporation they reluctantly accept that iron and steel making at Bilston near Wolverhampton will end next April, with 1,900 men going and 350 staying on at the rolling mill. Talks on redundancy terms begin on the 1st of May. But the Steel Corporation may find it more difficult to implement its next closure, the ending of iron and steel making at Corby in Northamptonshire.
With the threat of disruption to holiday plans by civil servants lifted, many people have started the Easter break early. Ray Gowdridge has been looking at how the authorities have been coping with the rush.
Thousands of travellers passed speedily through the country's airports, free from the anxiety of long delays. Greece, Cyprus and Spain seem to be the most favoured destinations, with flights fully booked and extra planes laid on. So promptly had the holiday started that normally busy streets, like those in the City of London, were unusually calm and free of traffic today. British Rail had a quieter start to the day than normal, with several thousand commuters not bothering to come into work. But by lunchtime, the holiday rush was on. Those who did come into work mingled with holidaymakers leaving for the weekend. Special trains were laid on to cope with the large numbers of people trying to get to the West Country and to the Channel ports. At Dover, with the customs and immigration men working normally, the queues to cross to the continent were kept to a minimum. And although the ferries were heavily booked, there was room for everyone. But for those taking holidays in Ireland, the docks at Dublin, affected by industrial action, presented a less happy prospect. Imports of oil are affected and there's been a petrol shortage. The Irish government has now taken control of oil supplies, but anyone taking a car to Ireland is warned to fill up the tank before leaving Britain.
Going home for the Easter holidays is Princess Michael of Kent, who's left hospital with her new baby, Lord Frederick Windsor. He's 7 days old. The Princess and Prince Michael showed off their new son on the steps of St Mary's Hospital, Paddington. Prince said Lord Frederick was in tremendous form, £8 now and growing fast. The princess then handed over her baby to his nurse, and everyone craned for a last glimpse, though some had a better view than others. Prince Michael then drove them back to their new home, Kensington Palace. Winchester Cathedral was the scene today of the traditional service at which the Queen hands out Maundy money to pensioners. But the occasion was dampened slightly by a medieval saint, as Bruce Barker reports.
St Swithin, whose tomb lies alongside Winchester Cathedral, got the blame for drenching the thousands of people who'd waited several hours for the Queen to arrive. It was heavy rain too on her journey from Windsor, which made the Queen and Prince Philip 15 minutes late for the service. Winchester was once the seat of the Queen's ancestors. The Maundy service is almost as old as the cathedral itself, which this year is celebrating its 900th anniversary. There were 53 men and 53 women present to receive the Maundy money. The procession moved down the longest cathedral nave in Europe, with yeomen of the guard carrying the Maundy purses, white for the men and green for the women. The Maundy coins the pensioners receive, silver pennies, tuppences, threepences and fourpences, add up to as many pence as the Queen's age, 53. After the Maundy service, the Queen went on a walkabout by Winchester's law courts, and once again it was flowers all the way.
And two football results tonight in Division 4, Barnsley 1, Hartlepool 0, Scottish League Division 2, East Stirling 0, Dunfermline 2. And so to the main points of the news again. Inflation is up for the 5th month in a row, but it's still just under double figures. The Prime Minister has challenged Mrs Thatcher on whether she'd honour pay comparability awards in the public sector. The Times won't publish next Tuesday after all. Talks between management and one of the unions have broken down. And the South African government has accused some American diplomats of spying and says they'll be expelled. Well, that's the 9 o'clock news. Now let's have a look at the holiday weather with Bill Giles.
Good evening to you. Well, typical April day, a lot of heavy showers about today, and more persistent rain too near this low pressure area, but that's moving away northwestwards now and allowing the next low to come in fairly quickly towards us. But let's look at the latest satellite picture, and as you can see over Ireland, a great deal of cloud near that low pressure area. A lot of fairly heavy showers over the country this afternoon. They're moving northwards now. And then if we come right down to the southwest of the chart, the beginnings of the next frontal system, that'll push in fairly quickly towards us. But if we look at tomorrow's weather in a bit more detail, a fair amount of cloud and rain over Scotland tomorrow, but it will gradually brighten up and become more showery, except in the far north of the country, brighter in Northern Ireland with a few showers too. Most of England and Wales dry with some sunshine, not very many showers on the eastern side, but more rain coming across into the Channel Islands and the southwest around the middle of the day, working its way north, getting up across Wales into the Western Midlands later on. But for most of us, as I say, another fairly warm day, especially in the east. That's it. Very good night to you.
There's some cracking entertainment about to break this Easter on BBC1. The film version of Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber's famous rock opera, Jesus Christ Superstar.
Jesus Christ, who are you, what have you sacrificed?
The Robert Brothers Easter Circus comes to town with a dazzling display of thrills, skills, excitement and daring under the big top. More surprise guests, fun and games in a special edition of Larry Grayson's Generation Game.
What's the name of the game?
With many of their hit songs, ABBA star in a television spectacular and feature David Niven, Roxy Music and Kate Bush.
What's the name of the game?
And a group of 17th century mercenaries defend an isolated community in The Last Valley, starring Omar Sharif and Michael Caine. Top stars and special shows herald top entertainment for Easter on BBC1.
And now on BBC One, Peter France introduces The Silent Witness, a filmed investigation into the Shroud of Turin.
This is a photograph, in fact it's a negative photograph, of a piece of cloth that's kept in a box in Turin Cathedral. This cloth is known as the Turin Shroud. The reason that it's the subject of an exhibition here at Westminster Cathedral this Easter is that many Christians believe it is the burial cloth of Jesus, and that the image that is on the cloth is the image of Christ himself. The film that we're about to show is an examination of that claim. Now, much of the evidence in the film is scientific, and when the film's over, I'll be discussing it with one of Britain's most eminent scientists. I'll also be discussing it with religious experts, because, as you'll see, those who are investigating the shroud suggest that one day it may come to be accepted as physical proof of the event on which the Christian faith was founded, the resurrection of Jesus Christ.